Welcome to another episode of Six Figure Secrets for Fractional Experts. My name is Bradley Jacobs. I'm your host, the founder and CEO of Mylance. Today, I'm with Mark Lamb. Mark has over 20 years of experience in design and product, some of the biggest name companies in the world, Uber and Google. He's been freelancing on his own for the last 7 years plus. Mark, so excited to have you. Welcome to the show.
Thanks, Bradley. Glad to be here.
So give us the quick overview of the roles that you had, so your product and design at both Uber and Google, and then how that's translated into being a fractional on your own.
Yeah, sure thing. So I was a senior level IC at both of those companies. So I was a staff product designer. So with that, you're, still hands-on on the tools, but you're still expected, to be a leader and be involved in, the strategic side of it as well. The other big thing that's interesting about like the staff level role is you sort of look to raise the standard across the teams that you're on and kind of mentor and coach the other designers as well to up level their game.
And so when you actually work as a freelance designer, fractional, whatever you want to call it, what does the work actually look like today with a client?
Yeah, it's interesting how that's translated over. So I primarily work with early stage startups. Now, obviously, they need the design leadership, but they also need people to get, hands on with the work so that they can ship things fast. I think that's where I'm a bit different than, some of the other fractional design executives out there. Is I still very much see myself as a designer. So, I'm still using Figma. I'm still doing everything like that, but we're still talking about high level strategy, future roadmap stuff, all of that, except I'm someone who can do both. So oftentimes I kind of act like a fractional founding designer when the startup might not have a designer at all, or they've worked with maybe a contractor. And then I'll work directly with the founder or the chief product officer to work directly on the product with them.
Because when I think designer, I think I'm going to tell them what I need designed and they're going to go build it for me. You're talking about a pretty different thing, or that plus, plus, plus. I mean, how do you communicate the value that you bring is a quite different way than like, I'm just going to sit in Figma and design whatever you tell me to.
Yeah, exactly. And I think you kind of need both roles, right? Sometimes you just need to give direction to a designer and they're executing it. I think where I'm different and how I look at it, and I think how my clients look at me, is that, we're partners. So like I'm working with a chief product officer doing 0 to 1 stuff or future vision stuff. We're kind of doing it together. So like a big thing that I'm into is prototyping. So it's one thing to write a document or a PRD or a one pager about an idea. It's a different thing to actually go and bring that to life in an animated prototype. So we're often like kind of co-designing it together. Obviously, I'm working to help them, with their vision, of course, but it's often like a little bit of back and forth and a lot of iteration like that. So it's definitely not just them saying, hey, can you go and make this in Figma? They might get it started, but they're definitely like looking at me to help inspire some ideas as well.
A lot of our customers say they get pushback, especially from startup founders that are looking for full-time people, right? They're told by their investors or whoever that, they're just used to, I need someone full-time that's going to live, eat, and breathe my company. And you come in as a fractional, right? Do you get that pushback? If so, what is your response when you do?
Yeah, look, I think in a lot of roles, they do need someone full-time. It's just a matter of timing, right? And it's a matter of resourcing. Oftentimes, they will not need or, have the resources to have a full-time head of design. So the way I look at it and what I love about the fractional model is you're like a part-time permanent member, right? So you're like embedded in the team. You might have an email address there. You might be on their Slack. You're available. Like I jump on weekly calls with my clients. So it sort of feels like you're full time. I'm always available, like to answer questions, but I normally have like a dedicated block for hands-on work. But I think the way I look at it with fractionals and why it's such good value is that fractionals always, well, at least how I feel, you're always trying to show and prove your value, right? So you're always trying to make the biggest impact you can because you're not full-time. So you're always trying to make sure that you're over-delivering consistently. I think eventually, like I normally help my clients hire out their design team, but that's normally way down the track after they've got a lot of traction.
Okay. So, and have you had the pushback where they said, oh no, we love your background and what you could bring to the table, but we need someone full-time? And have you transition that into a part-time role, or someone says that and you're like, okay, good luck, find someone full-time?
Yeah, look, my frame with any of this is I'm just looking to help. So if I think I can help, so oftentimes I'm like, okay, well, because a lot of the times I'm also introduced through a referral or someone that I know, I'm like, would you like me to help you out until you find this person? So it might be a month, it might be 3 months. I've had things that have turned into 18 months, right? Where I've helped them hire it, but they're like, can we please keep you around in some capacity, right? So I often might say, hey, look, I can even help you write all the position descriptions and interview them, build a first version of a deck for the product, and that's all they need. And they hire the perfect person, and that's great. Oftentimes, they'll still keep me as an advisor, just as someone else to bounce ideas off. But yeah, you do get that pushback, and oftentimes they do need someone. It's just a matter of when and how. A lot of the time too, with founders, they've never hired a design leader before. They're not sure what to look for, or if they're trying to get someone really quality, how to, sell them on the role. So I can help with that as well.
I love that mentality, and I just want to call it out because I think it takes you really far of, look, I'm here to help. This is my main job. I'm here to help you. If you have a problem, even as who do I hire, right? That's not exactly leveraging your design product strategy, but you've certainly hired a ton of people. I'm sure at Uber, at Google, you know what good looks like. You can certainly add value there. So you're just, how can I help? And that ends up getting you potentially in the door for a long time.
Yeah, and I think people can honestly tell, right? And all I'm looking for is an opportunity to demonstrate how I can help, right? So a lot of the time I'm just helping, like answering questions on LinkedIn or helping people just generally because I love startups and I love product, right? It's fun for me. But, say it looks like it needs a bit more of involvement from me ongoing, then we can talk about what that would look like.
Yeah. And I think you said something there also I want to hit on of it's fun for you. And when a lot of people are trying to figure out like, what's my niche or how do I add value? What does this look like? It's a great question to ask yourself of like, what do you love doing? Because then you're not so obsessed with the money or the scope or right. You're saying like, okay, I love this. And I genuinely want to help you. That will often lead to really good things and good financial reward and all of that. Right. But that mentality ends up taking you really far.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think you don't have to have it all figured out at the start, right? I think the way I'd normally encourage it, particularly with other designers I'm coaching, is what do people naturally think of you for, or what do you get referrals regarding? Because obviously someone thinks highly of you of that, and that's, you must be good at it and you must have a good track record. So that's probably a good place to start. I think it's that balance, right, between what does the market need, what are you good at, and how can you make it financially viable? For people who are starting out, I recommend try a few different things. Like I know you've found your like very specific one is like a fractional COO, and you've found clients where they really value what you do, and it's really good. But sometimes it takes a bit of trial and error to find that sweet spot. But it's a bit like with product market fit. I think once you find it.
Yeah, and for me, I found a great client off the bat, but I'll be honest, I wasn't even sure at the time what made me so successful in finding that client, and it took me probably a good 9 to 12 months of testing different kinds of language, positioning, different outreaches, different ways of handling the conversation before I got to a very clear, concise, this is what I do and this is who I do it for. I mean, it was probably 9 to 12 months of iteration that maybe a lot of people don't realize or don't fully appreciate what that's like to pitch, not really knowing what I'm pitching, but just putting something out there, seeing the response, and then iterating. It's kind of a slight product market fit testing over just iteration.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's a lot like early stage products in that regard, right? And I think one of the things I love about, working with you and working with Mylance is that you're not theorizing about what works. You're actually a fractional executive, and you're actually using frameworks that worked for you guys. Like you have a strategy, you know what works, what doesn't, and you're actually quite good at teasing out like what is someone's like special superpowers and who are they targeting, or at least forcing them to start thinking about it, right? And then giving them feedback from there. But it definitely does take a bit of time, right? I know for me, like particularly if you're out there always talking to people, you'll know when something hooks or resonates with people, right? So for me, I know with early stage startups, I think sometimes there's that perception that design's not important, but I think a lot of the time they're thinking of design as like more polish. Now, obviously, you don't have the time or resources to get everything perfect at the start for early stage startups. But if you can start prototyping ideas and visualizing it early, it's actually going to save you a lot of time and money in the long run. So I kind of pivoted a little bit like that and focused more on like ideation and prototyping with the early stage stuff.
What you said there, I say this a lot, is when I finally got to a sentence that worked, I knew it. And I knew it based on the client's reaction when I would say it. right? I said a certain sentence about their operational scale with, process and product versus human capital in the freight space. Like the CEO's eyes would kind of light up. He's like, oh, yes, right. That's it right there. And I was like, okay, this is the positioning statement then that I'm going to use. And time again, it would work. And
Absolutely.
it's hard to describe that. Like, what does that really feel like? You kind of have to know it, know it when you see it, but it does happen and you do know it. It's pretty obvious, right?
And the more people you talk to, the more common patterns come up, right? So if you're talking to a lot of early stage founders, they're having the same problems by not, for example, having a COO. And then once you can demonstrate that you're very familiar with these problems, you understand exactly what they're going through, and you know how to solve these, and you've done it before at scale, then they suddenly think, how can I work with you? Like, how can I help you? And I often think that if it's the right fit, there's not much of a sales process. You just need to make a deal happen, but it's finding that right fit that's the tricky thing.
I agree. It's not a pitch. It's not like, hey, I'm Mark and I'm really talented in the following ways, right? It's a lot more natural than that. But how do you, from your experience, advise other fractionals strategize that call? Like, what is the structure? How should they go about doing it? What should they do? What should they not do?
I think it's like for me, so I'm a qualified coach as well. So mine comes from the concept in coaching, calling, doing everything in the spirit of service. So I know they're called sales calls, they're doing all that, but I make sure that I only get on calls where I'm generally interested in meeting the person and talking to them anyway, right? So my whole frame is I'm going on there to understand them and their situation. And if I can help, normally that will just unfold organically through the conversation. I'm actually going in there assuming that it might not be a good fit and I might have to refer them to someone else, right? So I'm always going in there with that's an option that I'm going to do. And a lot of time that's happened and then they've referred someone else to me that was more of a fit, right? Because I think people, particularly founders, that, they're not silly. They know if someone's selling them something that they don't need. So if I feel like I really could help them, then yeah, I'll tell them all about how it works and I'll even set up another call. But I don't go into every call assuming that this is going to have some kind of a proposal or something like that. I'll also end calls early if I think it's just a mismatch or something like that, because you don't want to waste anyone's time. To me, I think that's respecting the other person's time. And normally I've referred them to someone else anyway by that point.
This has come up on the pod many times, and it's the integrity of if they're a good fit, I will help them. And if they're not, I'm going to be honest and still try and help them anyway, but maybe by referral to someone else. As you said, that people know when they're being sold to something that they don't need, right? We all have that intuition. And the karma almost in a way comes back to you of you did the right thing, you had that integrity. And now maybe not tomorrow, but at some point that's going to come back to you in a positive way, right? They'll refer someone who is a good fit, or they'll come back to you when you are a better fit for them, maybe down the line. But I mean, I just want to call that out because that integrity is hard when you really want the money and you want the business, but it actually pays off more so when you have that integrity and discipline around it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, because we're fractionals, we can only have a limited amount of clients, right? So I think you have to love your clients. You have to love working with them, because you're not a company where you can just infinitely scale and have as many clients as you want. So you want ones where it's a really good, mutually beneficial fit. And the other one I've done, because obviously I'm from a UX background, and they're coming to improve the UX of their product, I'll actually give them a free critique on the call of the product and call out a couple of things I think they could focus on, and then refer them to someone. Oftentimes, a few months later, I've had them come back to me and say, hey, actually, we decided, can you help us? We tried working with someone else and it didn't work out, but we really need this done. And then it worked that way. But, you just never know.
So agree you want to love your clients, and yet as you talk, I can't help but think there's such an abundance mentality with the way that you talk, right? You're like, look, if it's not a fit, that's okay. I'll refer them to someone else. There's a lot of people that don't have that abundance mentality. They're like, I need clients. I don't know where my next client is coming from. What would you tell those people that are like, look, I don't necessarily have the background that Mark Lamb has. I don't have the network that Mark has. What do you tell that person?
Yeah, look, I think you and Mylance are a great example of that. You've got to be active and go on posting content, having conversations with people, things like that. And I guess this is the thing you said with Mylance, with your done for you services, is that a lot of the time people, they don't have the time or the energy to go and do that. And it's kind of like this just feedback loop where they don't post anything, then they don't get any new clients, and then they don't feel like they're growing or making any progress. That's what I love about you guys, is that you can kind of extract kind of that some of their IP or the specific things that they'd be advising or consulting on, and then turn that into content that can go and get the word out there better. Like I always say to people, there's no point being the world's best kept secret, right? So you might as well, put your message out there and know that it's not going to resonate with everyone, but that's good. They're the clients that you don't want. But the clients that you do want, they'll see what you're saying and they'll be starting to hit you up. So I think that's a big thing. The other one is, oftentimes, people who decide to become a fractional executive after maybe similar to me, 20 years in corporate, you're a bit of a beginner again. So you've gone from having a big team and a big title and a lot of responsibility back to feeling like you've kind of got to start again in a lot of ways. And there's a lot of fear around that because it's such a big change. But if you just bring the same level of discipline and rigor to what you were doing in your executive job, and you're consistent, eventually you're going to get success. And I'm sure you see that with all your clients. Once they start posting content, once they understand how to structure their offers, how to do sales, all of that kind of stuff, it just starts to happen naturally.
Yeah. And I appreciate that message. There's a lot of people that come to me and they say, my pipeline's not full and I do some word of mouth and referrals, but I don't, have a consistent stream. And I'll always ask, well, what else are you doing? Right? What activities do you do weekly? And often the answer is nothing. And I'm like, well, I wish it worked like that. That would be great if I could do no marketing and just have clients fall in my lap too. But that's certainly not how it works. You're a business owner, right? And you need to be doing consistent sales and marketing to have success, regardless of your background.
That's the key thing. I think when it started for me, is starting thinking this is part of my job now. So you'll see even, the CEOs of the big companies, they will post on social as part of it. You've got to think, hey, look, I'm the CEO of my own company. I've got to be putting my viewpoint out there for everyone like that. It's just part of, new school marketing. You just have to be doing it. Yeah. You have to be active.
People ask me about my LinkedIn all the time. And I'm like, look, I wouldn't be doing this if it weren't for Mylance. I don't really care that much about my personal brand. I'm going to be honest, right? 100% of what I post is marketing for Mylance, and that's it. And it's so much more powerful actually coming from my brand than if I posted all this stuff on the Mylance company page. It's no one really cares about that. We repost stuff and whatever, but it's actually a lot more powerful when it's a personal story. That's also why we do this podcast too. It's right. Telling people's stories, telling my story, telling the Mylance story through the podcast, so much more powerful than just posting on the Mylance company page and saying hey, look what we're doing. We can help.
Yeah, I've noticed that a lot too. So there's a trend with designers that they'll brand themselves as a studio, even though it's one person. I think that's one way to do it for sure. But for me, if you're only dealing with one person and I'm the person doing all the work, why not just make it personal, right? Make it, you're dealing directly with me. I'm sharing content that I think is valuable. And yeah, I think it resonates with the right people.
Yeah. And I don't personally want to work with, in some situations, I don't want to work with an agency where I'm going to get passed off. If I'm, seeing Mark's content, I want to work with Mark, and that's what you offer. Right. So yeah, I'm kind of with you. It's why, if I'm one person, why am I pretending I'm this big studio or even just bigger than I am?
Yeah, I think to your point before, where you said how you're different from when you've worked with some designers or heard about it, where you sort of give them a brief and they go and execute it. I think that's more what that kind of studio model's for, where you're hey, look, I just need someone to do all my social media graphics or edit a bunch of things or whatever. I think that's pretty good, and there's a place for that. But the way that I work is I'm much more like a consultant and an advisor and a coach. So it's very much a lot of back and forth and very collaborative. So it's just a lot different. They're both good for different things.
So you bring a lot of strategic advice to the table for your clients. And I got to think a number of that is informed by your experience at Uber. And, I used to work at Uber as well. So I'm personally curious. My guess is our audience is as well. No secret, Uber had massive competition across the globe, right? Lyft being the main competitor in the US. Back in the day, how did Uber think about or use design to its advantage to try and eke out some competitive advantage against Lyft back in those days?
Well, it definitely was very competitive. I don't know about you, but for me, competition brings out the best in me. So I used to, play a lot of sports when I was younger. I'm obviously from Australia, so I used to play cricket and rugby. So I actually liked that, and I liked that about Uber at the time. I think the other thing why it brought out the best in everyone is that, very worthy competitors. Like, it was very, very close, right? And a lot of geos, they were winning, and then some we were winning. I mean, it just made it interesting. I loved it. To me, the big difference was, or at least what was making the difference. You might think, did you have the better design team or whatever? They both had great design teams. I think the thing that made the difference was how fast we were. So the thing that I think was rare about that design team at Uber when I was there was, normally you think, that 3-point triangle, you can have scope, quality, or time, which one is more important. When I was there, it was all important. So I'd never seen so much high quality work cranked out so fast. So that was the big thing, is that, and this is what I loved about the concept of the Uber Jam session, right? Where it's like, there's not a giant amount of planning with a lot of things. It's like, right, product manager, engineering lead, designer, let's get in a room and let's work out this problem and let's go and start building something, right? So that kind of mindset, I think that was the difference that helped us move really fast. I think the other one, and this is where I help when I'm working with startups, and I think it's also because of my coaching and consulting background before I was working in-house at big tech, is getting alignment quickly, right? So it's very hard if, like, you're battling to get two people to agree what you're going to build. If you can very quickly get people excited about that, things can move a lot faster and you get a lot of momentum. And that's where design can help, because you can help visualize what you're actually going to be building. So I think the thing that made the big difference was speed of execution. I think I've never seen such, execution excellence as I did there. It was like the biggest blueprint for how you do it properly. Now, it wasn't always perfect, and it was a little bit fast and loose in parts, but overall, just the mindset of, some of the principles like let builders build, all of those kind of things really resonated with the people there. And I think, they really believed it and embodied it in a lot of ways.
And that's the next question, which you kind of just answered, but I want to add a little bit more context, because I worked at Uber, so you're kind of speaking my language, but most of our audience didn't. So what about Uber? And we're talking 2016, 2017 years, right? So the company's still, getting bigger, certainly scaling, but it's still relatively early on, right? We're talking a good 8 years ago from now.
Pre-IPO, yep.
Yeah, pre-IPO, Travis is still CEO. We're still scaling all over the globe. We're raising tons of money. Like, it's fast and loose, as you said. What about Uber enabled it to hit that three triangle that most companies, you say something's got to give, but with Uber it kind of didn't. You had the quality, you had the scope, you had a super fast moving team. Like, how did they do it?
I think it's a couple of things, right? And I think that it's never normally one thing. One is they had very high caliber people there at the time. So you remember at the time, it was the most exciting company in the world, right? It's a bit like, at the moment, OpenAI is just this massively growing thing. No one knows exactly what's going to happen with it. Uber was similar, right? So you had a lot of people leaving Google, leaving Facebook, leaving all that to come to work at Uber because of that. So I think there was a lot of very high caliber people. I think the other thing is it attracted people who were bought into TK's kind of vision for the whole thing. Like, it was attracting people. So there was a lot of people who'd founded their own startup before, or they'd worked with startups, and they really loved that mentality, and they were okay being a bit scrappy if they needed to. So I think it was like that combination of attracting the right talent, but then like enabling them to go and just do their thing, right? I know particularly when I started on the developer platform there, it was run like its own startup. So the head of product, Chris there, he ran it like it was his own startup. So he'd run a bunch of startups, and he was empowered to run it how he thought it was going to be effective. And I think a lot of companies kind of say they do that, but it really did work like that. And every team was empowered to do things how they thought it would work to be successful. So I think that's one of the main things. Get really good people, and then give them the right things to focus on, and then just let them go and do it.
Yeah. And it's funny you say this, because you and I worked on totally different parts of the business in different parts of the world. And yet I felt the same thing. I felt that I was like the little CEO of my city. And frankly, back in the day, I could do whatever the hell I wanted. I mean, they really did empower us to say, like, go scale, whatever it takes to scale, do it. Right. And we had the resources, and that helps a lot. Right. They gave us a lot of money to work with, but it's not easy when you're probably at the top to actually let that happen. And yet Travis set that culture and actually followed through with it to say, let builders build, which is one of our core principles at the time. and actually let that happen.
Yeah. And I think that the difference I forgot to add is we were held accountable, right? So I've had things, when I've worked with clients and we're like, hey, like just empower people and let them do it. And then they don't get results. And I'm like, okay, so what are you going to do? We need to change something. And they're like, well, we'll just keep doing the same thing. Well, you're going to keep getting the same results. So you'd know at Uber, it was a real sink or swim kind of place, right? You either just loved it there and you're successful, or it just wasn't a good fit for you. And I think that's fine, right? But you have to be accountable. So I think that was the big thing where we were encouraged, like, take calculated risks if there's a chance of a big payoff, but ultimately you are accountable for it.
Right. So that ends up being the really important third part of the equation, right? It's the right people that are set up for autonomy to let them go build, and then they're held accountable for the results. And it was a no bullshit culture, right? If you didn't get the job done or your metrics weren't moving in the right direction, people got fired pretty quickly. There were very, intense performance review processes, a lot of feedback given. It was a very, as you said, sink or swim kind of culture, which frankly is not for everybody, but it did get the job done for the people that thrived in that environment.
It was run like a big startup, right? It's the same as with startups. It's sink or swim. You've got a limited amount of time to be successful. Most people don't succeed. So it's hard. But if you have the right people and you have the mindset, I think the big thing that I left Uber with, the big lesson when people ask me, because I'm from Australia now, I'm back living in Australia, is I honestly believe that anything's possible. Like after seeing that and the crazy things that people said were impossible, or the huge amounts of money at the time that were raised that just seemed unbelievable. Yeah, now I'm just like, anything's possible with enough time and money.
Unfortunately, this is where the episode with Mark ends because we had some technical difficulties and we're not able to reschedule. But I do want to emphasize a lot of things from the episode that Mark and I talked about, given our shared experience at Uber. And one of the things that we left talking about there was, with Uber, we saw what was possible. And it felt like the world was possible, in part because Travis and the entire culture and ethos of the company was just go for it. Just raise money, just expand globally, just make big, bold bets and try new things and throw things at the wall. And that's exactly what we did. And in part because we did that, a lot of the people that were there at that time, we have this mentality. We have this mentality of play big and go for it. And you have very little to lose. I mean, Travis at this time, he decided to expand into China. And as we all know, every tech company, basically, besides, I think, Apple, struggles in China. China essentially kicks them out and makes their own, right? Their own competitor. And Uber, with Travis at the helm, said, screw it. We're going to raise a bunch of money and we're going to go into China and we are going to compete head to head with Didi at the company at the time was our biggest competitor, and just go for it. And he put $2 billion towards that effort. And we ended up selling Uber China to the competitor Didi, and we sold it for a huge stake in Didi. I think it was either 15 or 20%, something like that. So the $2 billion bet ended up being worth over $10 billion in market cap, if not more. I'm sure it's more now. So this is all to say, what can we learn from this mentality, this mindset, as we look at our fractional executive or boutique agency business? And I'd say the number one takeaway for me is go out there and do the thing. And it sounds simple, but a lot of us don't do it because we're scared. We're not quite sure the best way to do it. We don't know how it's going to go. And that uncertainty, it stops us. It stops us right in our tracks all the time. And it builds imposter syndrome. And I don't know. And will I look stupid? Will this fail? And it's like, look, it might fail. And it also might be amazing. And even if it, quote, fails, you will have learned something valuable along the way. I know you've heard this time and time again, but this is the biggest takeaway from the experience at Uber and what Mark and I were talking about. And the other thing that I want to hit on real quick is talent, right? Finding talent to support you in the things that either you don't like to do, you don't want to do, you don't know how to do, or to just build a more robust bench for the skills that you do have, right? I was just on the phone earlier with a chief HR executive, and her plate is basically full. She said she has 55 hours a week of client work. And so she's working to find other CHROs, that are going to support her, right? So where she can basically give off work to these other people. And what I told her first is make sure you're taking the lowest hanging fruit, frankly, the tasks that aren't really worth your time or kind of like below your pay grade in a way. Take those off your plate first and find amazing talent, right? Mark and I talked about the talent at Uber. We had 6 interviews, exercises on down the line to get through, and the interviews were hard. I left my final round interview at Uber thinking that there's no way I got that job. I was like, these questions were so hard. I didn't do well. I did my best, and my best was good enough in this case, but it was so hard. I felt like I failed. And so hire amazing talent to support you, throw things at the wall, go for it, do the thing, be consistent, learn, fail, get back up on your feet. That's what being a business owner is. That's what it's about. That's what it's all about, is enjoying the journey of building and learning and making mistakes and pressing forward anyway. With that, we're going to end today's episode. Thank you so much for joining, for supporting this podcast, for getting value and sharing it with a friend, for coming back to me saying, hey, I listened to the podcast and I got value. I get that quite a bit now. And it really lights me up because we spend a lot of time and energy on this. And it's really meaningful to us to add value. So with that, I will sign off. Come check us out at Mylance. We can do the thought leadership for you on LinkedIn. We can build that authority in your niche. That's our specialty. That's our bread and butter. It's what we do. It's what I do for myself, and we do it for our clients. We also have an amazing community that's worth checking out. It's completely free. So come join us. Come check us out, mylance.co. Come follow me on LinkedIn. If you like this, give us a like, subscribe, and let me know. I'd love to hear from you. With that, have an amazing rest of your day.